say you should prepare for every eventuality, right? That anything that can go wrong will go wrong. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for joining me today, everyone. This is Magnifying HR Voices. I am your host, Julie Turney. Yay, yes, finally got it to work. Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness. Technology, technology, technology. Well, the first you don't succeed, you keep on trying. I am here today with Aiko Bethea. I am so excited to have this conversation. I've wanted to talk to Aiko for so long. And maybe in my excitement, something went wrong with StreamYard. I don't know. But anyway, we're here now. We've got it all sorted. Please tell us where you are chiming in from. Where are you joining us from today? Aiko is excited to be here. We're going to have this conversation about being the only in HR. I'm going to bring up Aiko. I'm not going to waste any time. Let's get this party started. Hi, Aiko. Oh my goodness. That has never, ever in the history of Magnifying HR Voices never happened to me before. Never, ever.
No problem. Things happen. Roll with the punches, right?
It's true. Thank you so much for your patience. And thank you, everyone, for highlighting so that I could fix it. Because we would have been talking. We started our conversation. And we would have been talking.
You're on a roll.
Where is everybody? We were definitely on a roll. So let's try this again. There we go. I'm going to leave you to introduce yourself to everyone, and then we will get started. So here we go.
Okay, so the question is, tell you all about my DEI journey. So what I was sharing earlier is that there wasn't a point where I just came to the work and felt like, oh, I want to do DEI work. I think that for many people, you find that just by virtue of the life that you live, the communities you're in, and the lived experiences you have, you are more attuned to when people are being treated fairly or not, or when people are included or excluded, especially when you're often the one who is excluded. I think that also a few gifts that I have or that were given to me is being raised very poor. So that meant that I was raised in an all Black community because my mom is Japanese. And I was raised in a Japanese speaking household. And many of you know that if you're raised with your parent who is not Black, and if you are wealthy, you usually will not be in an all Black neighborhood. So I was able to be raised in community, which was invaluable to me and was a gift for me. I think that also many of you who might find yourself as first generation, then you also understand what it means to translate languages, systems, experiences, noticing things like power exercised over mistreatment, and you're just much more attuned to that as somebody who might be speaking a different language. So that really impacted my view about what's fair and what's not. So one of my values is justice. And I went on to practice law and also went on to be in philanthropy and other things. And many of those spaces were very white spaces where I found myself as being the only one and experiencing the same things that you experience in society. So I've always thought about equity work as leadership work in terms of when people are not aware of whose voices are included, they're not really aware of whose voices are excluded. If they aren't used to being around many of us who aren't in some of these rooms, it's easy for them to not see us. So really, what impact does that have on the performer in terms of the employee? What impact does that have on the organization? So, and mostly, what impact does that have on the leader? So, at the end of the day, I just see equity work as leadership work, period. What kind of leader do you want to be? What type of organization do you want to have? And then in terms of the work, when I'm engaging with different folks, my goal often is to center our voices and for us to remember what our voice is, what our boundaries are, and also not forgetting what I call our first voice. And so much of my work centers on us as the onlys versus centering on us assimilating or code switching in order to meet the needs of the spaces we're in. And that's how I came to this work. And that's really what I center when I am in this space.
I think that's super powerful, Aiko, and thank you so much for sharing your story because I think a lot of times we struggle with being the only in an organization. and finding our center and being able to find our worth and our value. And I think a lot of times, this is exactly why I wanted to have this conversation today. And I know I'm seeing already our audience talking about the importance of inclusive leadership, being from a multiracial home as well. I think that's Lara. So I think this is a really great conversation for us to have today. Now, the reason why I wanted to have this conversation and why I reached out to you, as I mentioned before, a lot of my HR community have been asking this question, sharing their stories, and then asking the question about being told that they were token hires. So if you're in diversity, equity, and inclusion, if you're in HR, some organizations here ticking the box and just saying, we just ticked a box and we've hired you as our DEI. A lot of people are struggling with that. First of all, how dare you tell someone that? But a lot of our people are struggling with that, knowing that they were hired as a token just to tick a box. How do you do your job as the only when something like that has happened to you? So, this is the conversation that we're going to kick off with.
Yeah, so I think that, well, it happens in a lot of spaces where folks might not say you're the token hire, but they might say you're the quota, you're affirmative action, result of affirmative action, or what have you, which are all code ways of just saying you didn't cut the mustard, you're just here because of your skin, your gender, whatever. So in terms of how to deal with that, first, I want to just back up and talk about how not to be in that situation.
Yeah.
One goes back to interviewing the people who are attempting to hire you and who are interviewing you. What's their commitment to this work? Why are they doing this work? What are the skills and values that you bring that they're honoring and that they feel are invaluable? So part of that is those are ways for you to figure out, are you going to be the canary in the coal mine, right? And do they really see you and understand and value your worth? And also, is this a place you want to be? So there's all of those things that happen in the beginning. So let's say now you're in the role and, Jane comes and she makes this comment, this offhand comment, you're the diversity hire, you're the token, or you're the what have you. I believe squarely in the idea of setting boundaries also. And what does that direct conversation look like with this person? I think that we have to be accountable for our words. So there's that part about setting the boundary right there. And you'll notice that everything I'm talking about is centering us and what's okay with us. It's not about fixing Jane and the system and all these other things. That comes. But I think for many of us, part of this is honoring our own self-worth and our first voice. And I'm centering us. And what do we need in that moment? So that moment, I need Jane to understand that that's unacceptable and for her to be accountable of what led you to say that. Right? What do you mean by that? Tell me more. What do you mean by that? So she, and I'm not all crunking to the next level. I'm asking her, what do you mean by that? And so she needs to be accountable for her words, and she needs to be accountable for the type of relationship she wants to have with me.
Yeah.
So I also know that sometimes there's power that's at play. So this could be Jane, who's a leader, or Jane, who's my boss, or what have you. And there's still ways to hold people accountable in terms of saying, well, tell me, why did you hire me? Tell me, what need do you think I'm going to fill? Tell me, what do you mean by that word? So to me, the accountability is really important for boundaries. And what do we need to be fed and to make sure that the role is serving us? One of my mentors or good friends, Phyllis Brim, I remember her saying, when you're thinking about when you're leaving a role, one of the questions you ask is it still serving me? So we also have to think about our mental health. Yes. We have to also be thinking about, what is this role providing for us? And so I know that my answer is not at all probably what people expected, but it is about centering us and what we need and what we demand from the space, and recognizing what is the space not going to give us, and figuring out, what does that mean now for us? Everybody doesn't have a privilege to just quit and leave, but it also means, how am I going to make sure this role is serving me, or I am being self-sustained in this space?
I think, and to your point, everyone doesn't also have the opportunity to say, okay, well, I'm not going to take this job, right? Because they have to put food on the table.
Absolutely.
They have to keep a roof over their head. And so people are not always at that space of feeling that they have that safety to do that.
That's right.
So in that moment, then what?
Yeah,
I'm
so
already here.
yeah.
I'm already
Yeah.
here. I've been hired. Then what?
I think it's the same thing of, why am I here in terms of the intentionality? If I'm here because right now I need these benefits, I need the bills to be paid. Now I know that I'm being intentional about why I'm here. Doesn't mean I can't set boundaries, but also it helps me to think about I'm here for now. And so what then? So sometimes we're in spaces we may not even, especially now, to have the mental and emotional capacity to deal with a lot of things. Part of it is, again, centering ourselves. Do I want to engage or not? Do I have the energy to engage or not? So sometimes there's this idea of you always have to go after every battle. So sometimes it's not about winning the battle, it's about winning the war. And the war isn't always about, hey, I'm going to be the big equity freedom fighter. Part of it is that the war is that I need to make sure that my rent is paid, my kids are good. Let's just bring it down to brass tacks. And what I'm doing here, how can I make sure that I'm being preserved and self-sustained? And that's just a fact. There is a weird dynamic, though, Julie, about being in HR.
Yeah.
Because in HR, you're also there to be the voice of, others who might look like you or not. And also sometimes you're in the front lines of setting boundaries of what's okay and what's not okay in the organization. And then oftentimes it all depends on the spaces that you're navigating about what do you do.
Yes.
So in organizations like that, I've really found myself, one, either starting employee resource groups or being very connected with people in community. I found myself finding folks in organizations who are accomplices, who are willing to chip away at the establishment and harmful behaviors and hold people accountable. I found myself also thinking about how you get even more validation of understanding what is your self-worth.
Yes.
But the thing that we can't do is make sure that those spaces around us and the places where these words are coming from in terms of you're an affirmative action hire, you're a token, you're a diversity hire, that we don't internalize them about our own self-worth. That's what's first and foremost important.
Yes. I totally agree with that. Kind of flipping it on its heels and understanding now, okay, so I'm here and I can make a difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You talked about community. You talked about finding people to help you. Like where do I look for these people if I don't have that right now?
So I think sometimes, especially if you're an introvert or, and you're like me, it can be hard. I do think that it's an awesome thing that we have things like social communities now in terms of online. We're able to, my whole IG feed are all people who are saying encouraging things, affirmations, reminding me of who I am, why I do what I do. So these ways that I find that always feed into me is super important. I think that, again, employee resource groups, I think that being selective and clear about where you're showing vulnerability and connection, being engaged in the things that are important to you, those are all important. One thing that can also leave us a bit vulnerable, but perhaps at the end of the day, reward us with communities that support us, is being clear about what our values are.
Yeah.
And again, I go back to boundaries again about what's okay and what's not. So then you find that the people who are connecting with you, they know for sure who you are and what's okay and what's not for you. So you don't find yourself having to twist yourself into a pretzel for relationships that are harmful to you.
I like that.
Yeah.
I got to respect the power of the pause in that, because I think that it's so important for us to recognize that community is there. It's just being able to tap into it. And no matter how socially awkward you may be about it, if you make the effort, you will find your people.
That's right.
Because I think that that's something that I struggled with for a very long time, even to do something simple like this and say, Aiko, will you be a part of this conversation? My introvert self 2 years ago, never.
I was just going to say, but look at you. You're doing it now, girls. That's what we like to see. That's what we like to see.
Yeah, because I recognize now the importance of that. This is bigger than me, and these are conversations that need to be had. And if I don't step outside of it, then, how do I grow? How do I help other people? How do I contribute if I stay within myself? And so that's why I've made the effort to do this. I want to touch on your legal history. So you stepped out of legal, you took on this fight. What are some of the challenges that you had in the beginning as you started your DEI journey, working with companies, especially doing what you do in rare coaching, which is supporting leaders who are the only in the organization? What were some of the challenges that you had?
I think it's probably my challenges were common in terms of, not seeing people who look like you, validating the way that you show up. I think even for me, because I was so aware of the ways that society has treated people like me, because I experienced it firsthand or witnessed it in my family, that
Mm-hmm.
even building bridges of trust with folks who weren't like me was challenging. And it also takes some emotional labor to do that.
Yeah.
I think that also finding my own definition for what success is was important. That it wasn't all about being at a big firm. It wasn't all about these things. And another thing that I learned really early in, I think, even before practicing law, which was in college, was that for me, I needed to be with community.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to undergrad. I was at Smith College. So I was always engaged with the Black Student Union there. But in the summers, it was really important for me to be back in communities like the one I was raised in. So my internships were with the Children's Defense Fund, Black Student Leadership Network. And then I did the same thing in terms of my career history. I'd had to find people who understood that background and who understood, code switching and my first language in a lot of ways. So that was important. And narratives like ours, and they're always, the second mothers you have and second families you have who take you on and get it.
Mm-hmm.
So finding a tribe was so important to me, and seeing people do things in their own way, on their own terms, that was important.
Yeah. So throughout this conversation that we've had so far, I've heard you say a lot about searching within yourself, setting your own boundaries, knowing your own value and your own worth, and finding your tribe. All of these things crucial to your success, no matter who you are. But as we say, my audience today is predominantly HR professionals who are looking for answers. We started our conversation on HR people of color um, in organizations being told that they were token hires. And
Yeah.
you gave your advice on how we can go forward in terms of finding that value in ourselves. Now I'm in the organization and I have this job to do, and I'm getting some blockers. And obviously, a lot of those blockers are happening because I'm a token hire. How do I step outside of that? And what are some of the things that I can do immediately to show my worth, my value to the organization from a DEI perspective?
Okay, so I think probably where there could be even misalignment in the way that I answer it, because
Mm-hmm.
one, any HR person who's hired, Black person who's hired, I wouldn't want you to say I'm the token hire. They're characterizing me as the token hire.
Yeah.
And the
The
blockers I'm
label.
having are not because I'm the token hire. The blockers I'm having is because this organization is centered in a way that excludes me and doesn't know my value.
Mm-hmm.
My job is not to prove my value to them, because now I'm giving into the way to prove my value to them is to actually accept their standards.
Mm-hmm.
So that is what, and I know that's not the answer you probably, what that will resonate with a lot of folks, because I'm not going to tell you to assimilate. I'm not going to tell you to, it's not the way that I center the
Where
world.
that's right?
Okay.
We're here to have a real
Okay,
conversation.
so I want to be clear about that part. You can read books all day long where people are going to tell you to, assimilate, to figure out what they consider success to be and to do it. But I'm not going to do that. But I will go back and ask, what is it about this job that you want? Where is it that is going to align with your values and help you move the needle in things that are important to you? And there's always strategic ways to understand that what's important to you can still elevate the organization, right? It wasn't my job and my roles to start employee resource groups, but I did it because I needed that community. And I knew at the end of the day, there was also a business case around it that it would be supported. And there would be other ERGs, which is what happened. The other part is looking at how can I make certain issues more visible. So you can have things like panels, other things that are actually educating folks about what's wrong. Somebody says the word token, they don't understand what it means. Hey, maybe we need to have a learning session about this. Maybe if I don't have the capacity to do that, maybe I need to send an article throughout the organization about, hey, you know what, there's this article and this is a word I've been hearing a lot. I want people to understand what this term means or what have you. So there are things you can do in that way where it is maybe not a heavy lift for you, but educating others, especially bringing in articles and things like that. They're great ways to leverage other people's words.
Yeah. And I see Frank is saying, yes, we talk about token hire, but if you're hired without budget, resources, or power, then how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so I think one is being realistic about what's possible and also being clear about not only what's possible in terms of being clear for yourself, so you're not just working yourself to death, but also outlining, what does the strategy look like and what is required to make it successful. So there is this part that's just nuts and bolts, like we're not wizards, we're not magicians, but hey, if we want these things to happen, these are the resources that it will require. So I think the show and tell part is really important too. Any organization that's business oriented will understand that, hey, this is what we need in order to get this out of it. But oftentimes the work is for us to create the image and the pathway of what does that look like. If you want this is a way to get there, and this is what's required to make that happen.
And put it all together. That makes perfect sense. So thank you.
A lot of times in these places, they don't know what they don't know yet.
Yeah.
They don't know how to go about doing things. So for us, we're actually painting the picture and doing the nuts and bolts work, but saying, hey, this is what I'm able to do as a solo practitioner here, which is basically what I am. This is what we can do with budget. And hey, guess what? Expanding the idea of who owns equity in an organization, saying this is how much further we could get if we had the CEO do a town hall. We had the COO do this. We had talking points about A, B, or C. So recruiting other people to have part ownership of this again. So good question, Frank, because that's often the case we see with CDO folks, chief diversity officers, or the project manager, program managers.
Definitely. I see Juan. Now the questions are coming. Keep them coming, guys. I see Juan asking, what are your favorite resources to be better versed in these topics and help educate ourselves and others?
Favorite resources? Gosh, I think I have to think about that because it's not like I'm going around just studying a lot of things, and I take it for granted that I have a legal background sometimes. I think that where I do learn about what is happening and what's relevant now in different ways that people are monitoring things, it's really, I think, real-time following folks, listening to conversations, being parts of conversations. I will say that social media gives me a lot of insight about what's happening in buildings and places where I'm not. Understanding different perspectives of how things are impacting folks that I might not be privy to, especially now that I'm not in-house anywhere. But that part about being engaged in the conversation in all these different spaces has expanded the way I think about equity and diversity.
I think one of my favorite places to really see where these conversations are happening is Twitter. There's a lot of conversation happening on Twitter where diversity, equity, and inclusion is concerned. And then there are Facebook groups. There are a lot of Facebook groups that do very similar things as well. And you're hearing the conversations in there as well. I think my favorite Facebook group right now would be the HRPOC group. And there are thousands of HR professionals in that group that are sharing their stories, and so you're hearing and seeing what's happening. What are some of the who are some of the people that you're following though, Aiko? Because you talked about your IG. Like, who are some of the people
Oh my
you're,
gosh.
that
There's
you're
so
following now?
one of my favorites is definitely Black Therapist Rock. So it's not an HR group, but
Yes,
really that
yes.
idea of centering yourself and what have you. I listen to a lot of even off color voices as well, because I think that those are the voices that are usually not centered. They're
Mm,
not the subject matter experts, but I see what people are experiencing, and that's a part of my work, right? So I do that as well. And LinkedIn, of course, always has, I think,
yes.
elevated conversations
Mm-hmm.
or things that people share or break down. I love the work of Lily Zing. I
Mm-hmm.
love Michelle Kim's work, and she just came out with a book, Wake Up, which I already am a purchaser of it.
Okay.
Tara Frank, she has her book, Waymakers, coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Rachita Tolson, she has her book, Inclusion, coming out. So there are just a lot of powerhouse folks in this space. Um, and I follow them diligently because I'm always
Yeah,
always learning.
absolutely. One person that I follow a lot and love their stuff on LinkedIn is Taran Ellis. I think that he is a dynamo when it comes to talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and understanding, why it's important to think about who's in the room at any given point in time and how you can hold space for those people. So I definitely recommend Taran. I am going to go back through this live, guys, and I will put all of Aiko's suggestions in the chat. So be sure to go back and take a look at it as well. This is really good. So thank you so much for that. Someone, Craig Thomas, says he follows all of them. Okay, well, if you know anyone
Yes.
else, Craig, let us know. Let us know for sure. Next
The
question.
other thing I do want to tell the HR folks on here, professionals, is
Yeah.
that instead of you always using your cultural capital in an organization or your emotional labor, bring in the work by these different people. You don't have to be the one who's always just carrying the message.
Yes.
Bring in, a book read,
Mm-hmm.
bring in different articles that other folks read, so that it's not always you having to come up with original content, trying to figure out how to position it, what it is, but bring in the books or what have you, and have
Mm-hmm.
other folks carry some of the weight, even if from afar.
Definitely. It definitely. And even bring in speakers. Like, you could bring in people who would be willing to have like fireside chats and just have your staff ask questions, and then you can share the answers to those questions too. So yeah, definitely. I see another question and it's coming up as a LinkedIn user. Sorry, that's because you're private on LinkedIn. How have you navigated communicating the impact of being the only to co-workers and leadership?
Yeah, so it all depends on who the audience is and where they are on their journey or continuum, or what the environment is in the organization. But I can tell you a lot of different approaches I've taken. So one is, and I'm sure HR professionals, you guys are already, y'all are already hip to this, which is like using the fishbowl method. So having folks only listening to a conversation, they can't participate, but they're listening to a conversation. And maybe they're listening to a conversation of people who are the onlys. You can either do it with those folks' um, identification right there and them being present, where they're having a conversation. It could be a moderated conversation, but talking with each other about these experiences that they have. The great thing about the fishbowl is that people who are talking have no accountability or ownership to have to answer questions from others or to have to validate what they're sharing. So at that point, they're putting it out there. Another tool that's great to use if you don't want to have people's identities there is using a readers forum. So a readers forum has been really powerful and magical in terms of having folks who might be the onlys in their different spaces actually writing about what that experience is like.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is that you might have in the organization that I did it at, you can have folks actually line up. They're just at a mic, and there are all these stack of papers there, and you just come up and you read one. You have no idea what you're going to read, but you're reading somebody else's story and narrative. So that
Okay.
person's identity and who they are and their position in the organization, that's not what's focused on. but their story is. And it's so powerful to see the person's impact who's reading it at that moment, and also the people who are listening. So the readers forum is super powerful in terms of making sure that somebody is not being even more ostracized or isolated, because now they have to be more vulnerable. So that's another thing. Something that's similar to a readers forum is also having internal podcasts within organizations. So you're hearing these stories again, but again, people can go in and you can reuse the stories, or that experience of hearing somebody's story, because you're playing them. It's not them reading it, but it's somebody else reading it. And these are real experiences of your colleagues and peers, and you're finding out what happened to them. So this is a way to bring it home without having the person who experienced it be further targeted, but also making sure those narratives are captured as truths in the organization and part of the culture. So just a couple of different tools there to be able to discuss what it means to be the only. Oftentimes, if you have accomplices or allies, using them strategically and sharing what's happened to you, and even positioning them to either give you advice or being able to give them guidance on how they can support you. Another part is using case studies in organizations and workshops as a part of leadership training, so that people understand these are experiences that folks have that aren't desired. We don't want to have those experiences happening. Those are undesirable experiences. And what's their role in terms of making sure it doesn't happen? So all of these things put the ownership back on the person who is not the only, to have to navigate, understand, to believe, and to problem solve in terms of their role.
That's I love that. So many suggestions, but I love the one about podcasts, internal podcasts, because I don't think a lot of people think about that, or the benefits of having an internal podcast where you can share that information. But I also love getting people to write stories and then getting other people who are not the only to read the stories. Like, what's the most impactful experience you've ever had engaging in that exercise?
I think it's something to see somebody reading someone else's story, and they're so shocked as they're reading it, because remind you, these people don't get advance notice. You're picking up a story and reading it and seeing how it's impacting them emotionally right in that moment. And then all of the other folks who are the spectators watching, and also being impacted by not only the story and the words, but this person's response to it.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the same time, the person whose story it is not having to carry the emotional labor of that. But
Mm-hmm.
seeing people, how they're impacted, it does a few things. It closes a gap of empathy
Yes.
also, where I'm not focusing on Julie and saying, you know what, I know Julie because I know that story about her and I don't believe it and this is blah blah. I'm just listening to this other human's story being
Yeah.
read by another human, and it's impacting
Mhm.
me. That was really powerful to see in a room of people.
Mhm. Mhm. That's truly beautiful. I think that especially opening up people to be more empathetic and get a better understanding of what someone else has gone through and was feeling and thinking at that time, is almost like a form of design thinking, right? You're getting
Yeah,
that person to transpose it onto themselves so they get a different understanding.
that's right. And just to ask you, Julie, and maybe some of the folks who are listening,
Mhm.
why is it that you would not share with other people what the impact of being the only is? Like, what are some of the reasons you would not share it?
Fear of criticism.
That's right.
Yeah. You're afraid that someone's going to criticize you or diminish your feelings in that moment, make you feel less than when you already feel less than. No one wants to feel even more unworthy, or like they have less value, right?
That's right. Being more isolated,
Mm-hmm.
being maybe targeted, being not believed, and all the things you said, the hurt that comes because people didn't believe you or questioned you.
Mm-hmm.
All those tools that I was sharing are ways to protect the person who's targeted, but
Mm-hmm.
still have accountability for the organization or others for what their experience was. Because that's really hard to talk
Super.
about things like that in a space that where you've already experienced the harm, right?
Yes, definitely. It might even make you regress, like think about past experiences and past trauma. So it might make it even harder because then a lot of times we struggle with sitting in those feelings if we haven't really dealt with them, right?
Mm-hmm. This is a good point. Someone said, if you don't feel safe, you don't want to offer up your potential trauma.
Trauma.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Absolutely. No psychological safety, right? I'm telling you about a harm that I experienced in this space. Why would I put myself in the center? And
Yeah.
there is, a lot of HR professionals were put in this really difficult situation after the murder of George Floyd to orchestrate these moments and these conversations within organizations, to talk about what happened. But the organization had never done the work to create the psychological safety for those spaces.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so it was actually doing a lot of harm for people who are Black, who look like George Floyd, to be in these organizational conversations where the organization was inflicting harm,
Yeah.
never done the work. So now we're supposed to be in this conversation about racial trauma with people we don't trust. So I love the fact that the person who's the LinkedIn
Sonia.
said
Her
that.
name, yeah, I'm looking up. I have
Well,
to look at LinkedIn to
oh,
see
okay.
who it is.
He said that
Yeah.
because, yeah, you want us to share our stories. You want us to go out here and say these things, and you haven't created the container where it's psychologically safe, which translates to the fact that you didn't create this container where you deserve to hear my
My
story.
story.
You deserve
Mm-hmm.
to be, for me to be vulnerable around you.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
exactly right, Cheryl. I appreciate
Sherelle.
you saying
Yeah.
that. Oh, Sherelle, I'm sorry. I appreciate
Yeah.
you saying that. Yes,
Sherelle
yes,
is
Cheryl.
saying, yeah, we get tired of always educating based on our own trauma.
Yep, co-sign on that. Not only
Mm-hmm.
educating based on our trauma, but reliving the trauma and educating people while we're living through the trauma. So
Yes.
that's all of that.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I remember very early last year, another DEI person wrote an article on LinkedIn, Mandisa Diggs, and she wrote this article on, like, look, I'm tired. I'm just tired of everything that I'm feeling and having to explain to people like why George Floyd's death is making me feel the way it's making me feel and why I'm having to deal with these things in the workplace. And I want to change that dialogue from stop asking me how I'm feeling. We're all feeling the same way as Black people right now, and I want to change that dialogue. And I think, to Sherelle's point, we just get tired of educating people and telling people about this trauma that we are feeling and that we're experiencing. There
That's
are
right.
so many questions, Aiko. I have to roll back up 1 second. Let me see if we could get through them all. What is your advice on how best to partner with HR colleagues when DEI is separate?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Because oftentimes you are in this other pillar or what have you, but knowing that you are actually internal partners and that one actually impacts the other. So I think that one, sharing what your strategies are, thinking about where there's overlap and shared ownership. So being able to figure out how your priorities are aligned with one another and how you can leverage your resources together. I think and also because HR often has to also be educated and be elevated in the sense that they can even understand or support the equity work. So there's that as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's really important also to have a degree of understanding roles and responsibilities and being clear about it. Even though there's overlap, being able to be intentional about what that overlap is, who owns the D on certain things, but that transparency will help. What becomes really difficult is when there's a contentious relationship between the two.
Yes. And I've heard that and seen it happen quite a bit where HR and DEI butt heads.
Yeah,
What are some of your advice for restitution?
for restitution in terms of,
Sorry, for in terms of how do we fix that relationship? Sorry.
oh yeah, like the
Yeah,
reconciliation,
reconciliation. That's
rehabilitating
the
the
word I was looking
relationship.
for.
Um,
Yes.
I think sometimes it may even be how whoever was hired or brought in, what was the understanding of their roles. And a lot of work around equity work has to do with operational discipline of understanding who owns certain work, when will it be flexible, when is it different, what do you understand your role within the organization is. Now, there is this other part, which is maybe I'm not the DEI person or on the team of the DEI folks, and I'm in HR, but I'm the person of color I'm the person who's trans. I'm the person who has all, it has the lived experience and the other people don't.
Mm-hmm.
That can be really difficult when your lived experience is not valued or respected.
Mm-hmm.
But what that is telling you is that if you're having that experience, other people in the organization are and employees are. So there are ways to also make it that it's not just about your story and this person's not respecting me, but hey, let's uncover what's happening in the organization. And you're going to hear other people saying, hey, my lived experience isn't even respected here. And then you're able to say, I'm not the only one experiencing this. This is an issue here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So growth to recovery, anything is possible. So make sure that you're doing the best that you can to work together as HR and DEI. Next question. What are cultural norms? What cultural norms have you seen or would like to see established in organizations that discourage othering or tokenizing onlys?
So one is to stop having onlys. So have more folks in the room, because there's no feeling like witnessing somebody else actually amplifying somebody else's voice. When they're like, hold on, wait a minute. Did you hear what X, Y, and Z said? Of course, you don't have to have the shared identity or demographics to do that, right? So having accomplices and people amplifying other folks' voices. The other part is having agreement about how do we hold each other accountable, not just about equity stuff, but about a lot of things, because those are going to be the same rules of the road that you would use in these other topics.
Yeah.
A lot of organizations don't have that skill set of having transparent conversations, accountability, being directive. It's the exact same skill set. And that's why I say it's the same as leadership. The more that you treat equity conversations and issues as so different, separate, and unique, that's when you get the consternation of folks saying, oh my gosh, I have to do this extra thing, this extra work. It's for those people, versus understanding, actually, no. This is about our organization. This is about our culture. And you're actually not a competent leader if you can't deal with having direct feedback, transparent conversations, and thinking about stewarding our culture and our workforce. So I really try to ask people that as much as possible, you see how these competencies link.
Yes.
And hold people accountable. And it's not this special different thing, versus how can you be a leader if you can't actually have emotional intelligence? If you can't hear feedback, if you can't think about what's my part in this, you're not qualified.
Definitely can't. And that's a question again for us as HR professionals to call that out and deal with it the best way that we can. The questions are flying.
Yes.
And I love these.
Competencies. If you're putting all the stuff under competencies, you are good to go, because you can hold leaders and other people accountable for not creating an inclusive workspace, not being able to elevate creativity, low retention rates, lots of things. That's low psychological safety. Psychological safety enables inclusion, right? Retention of the onlys. But you can hold people accountable for not having fostering environments of psychological safety.
Definitely. Next up, what is your advice for international organizations? Cruise ships. Ooh.
Is Vaughn the one who weighed in and was like, when you said, where is everybody? He said, I'm on a cruise ship. I was like, wait a minute.
Come on now.
I do think that, so I will tell you that when I'm doing work with organizations that are international, aren't centered in the US or even in Western world culture, that I don't lead with the concept of diversity per se, because it's very Western world centric, but I do talk about equity in terms of mattering and being marginalized. Everybody can actually relate to that. Power over, power with. Everyone can relate to that. Guess what? Usually 9 times out of 10, guess who power is being exercised over? Guess what? In some countries where there are, it's homogenous in terms of not white. So for some of my clients who are based in countries in Asia where it's majority Asian, or countries in Africa where majority African, we're thinking about things like, we might be thinking about tribalism. We might be thinking about, faith. But it's still the idea of equity. Who's exercising power systemically over others?
Yes. So there's a lot for us to think about. And when it comes to equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how we can bring everyone together and have a better understanding of what makes us different. And that brings me to my last question. Every single time, the time goes away every single time. But I want us to get this in, because I was mentioning to you before that I read this amazing book by Dr. Joy Cox, and I was kind of looking for it to see where it is, but I see it over that side. Called Fat Girls in Black Bodies Building Their Own Communities. And a lot of times when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, it's not just about race, it's not just about sex and gender, but it's also about anything that doesn't make, and I'm going to coin Brene Brown's phrase, anything that doesn't make someone in an organization feel safe. And I remember listening to a podcast that you and Brene did some time back, and she said an organization isn't safe until everyone is safe. And a lot of times, people who are fat, who have size, however you want to put it, this is something that we struggle with in organizations. How can we be more inclusive, and how can we fight against fat phobia?
Yeah, so I would probably say some things about everybody being safe, because anyway, that's a whole nother conversation to unpack, because
Mm-hmm.
safety oftentimes is correlated with where there's an absence of risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure, right? So the idea of being in a space where it's okay to take risk too. So I
Yeah.
want to be clear about that. There's no place where everybody feels safe in that
Right.
way.
Mm-hmm.
But I love the fact about body image, body size, and fat phobia, because it's also been a way to diminish Black women and our image or body size or what have you. But I would just like to say that one thing is that, just empirically speaking, we know that body image and fat phobia is one of the biases that has only increased. It has not gone down, unlike others. So you think about our image
Yep.
conscious society. The other part is, the center of equity work is about power with versus power over, and having people matter versus being marginalized. So when we think about what brings up the idea of why do you not belong because your body is this way instead of that, what is that? So if we go back to what ideal in that looks like, it is this stereotypical image of how people perceive white women, and it centers that, but it's also from the perspective of men, white men also. So whenever we're thinking about body image, it actually harms all women, because all white women are not then all no kind of women, racial or ethnically,
Yes.
this size whatever idea.
Uh,
And so you always have to kind of break down the layers of it, of who's being harmed, right? So I just go back to the idea of where you look at the power of marginalizing people, who's being targeted. I think it's explicitly Black women are often targeted about our body image. The other part that's about body image, that's also size related and otherwise, is proximity to whiteness. It's
mm,
considered better and more beautiful, fairer skin, straighter hair, smaller body size, all of these things, even though we know that it
yeah.
does not align in reality of how all white women look, but
Mm-hmm.
that's centering. But I think it's so important for people to note that fat phobia is one of the biases that has only increased over the years. It is the one that has not gone down. And what does that tell you? And
Yeah.
who's being harmed? And just like fat phobia also impacts men as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Yep.
So I'm
Because
so glad that you said that, because folks don't think about equity and inclusion in the sense of this body image, fat
yeah.
shaming, phobia,
Mm-hmm.
which is real. We know that the folks who are hired, a lot of it has to do with whether people find you physically appealing or not
Attractive.
attractive. It's not
Mm-hmm.
just about what kind of name you have.
Yeah.
There's work to be done there. I'm
Yeah.
so glad you raised that, because folks don't talk about it.
No. And
Yeah.
that's exactly why I feel like it's important for us to bring all of these conversations out to the fore. And a lot of times I see that, and I hear some of my own clients say, like, look, I know I didn't get this job because I wasn't pretty enough, I'm too fat, or I've heard someone say they didn't think I could lift the products across the floor because I'm too fat. What does fat mean to a lot of people? Like a lot of time that fat phobia exists. And I think Dr. Joy Cox brought this out in her book that people feel fat means you're lazy. You know,
you're lazy, you don't care, you don't
yeah.
take care of yourself. People feel like they have the right to be able to say things to you about your body, about what you're eating.
Yep.
So there's just a lot of things about so speaking about that, I will say that there's this beautiful woman, she's a Black woman who is on IG, who I follow. What's her name? Jesmalyn, but she does yoga outdoors. I love that there's so many women who are elevating body image in different ways. Lizzo, of course, is
Yes.
and then there's also Amber Abundance. So they're all the people who are leading this charge around, healthy at any size, beautiful at all sizes, are Black women. And we're always the chain breakers.
Yes,
We're the chain breakers and setting people free all the time. I just have to say that. But those are folks who I love and I follow, and the freedom that they have in their skin makes me feel more free. It reminds me about all these different spaces we're told we can't be in, but we're right there.
Exactly.
Killing the game.
That's it.
Yep.
And sometimes creating our own doors, and we're okay with that.
Yep.
Definitely.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. I'm really glad that you brought that topic up, though. I really am.
No worries. Thank you for being a part of this conversation today.
Yeah.
I just can't believe it.
I saw Craig's question about the book.
I know.
I was going to say, Craig, let me tell you, Craig, that this is one small bookshelf in my home full of books everywhere, and I've got to stop. I've got to stop.
Oh my, it's nothing wrong with being addicted to books. I was kind of nothing. I am I have, so like my bookshelves sit right above my desk. Everything is up here. And then I still have some in my room, and I have some in the family room, and I have books.
They're everywhere. They're everywhere. They call me the messy professor. I'm like, there are books everywhere, but books are your friends. Somebody said body is not an apology. Yes. Thank you, girl, for saying that. Sonia Renee Taylor. I can't believe I didn't say her because she is the bomb, and her book is awesome, and it has a workbook with it as well.
Everybody wants your book list. Are you on Goodreads?
I'm not active on it. Y'all, I'm telling you, y'all don't want any parts of this. All these books, you don't want any parts of this.
Apparently they do. Apparently
I'll tell people one thing. I know we're over time. Can I say one thing, Julie?
Go for it.
Yeah. The other thing about centering us is the idea of what is joy for us, and us being able to navigate spaces and have joy for us where we're being fed, we're thriving, not just surviving. And I just want to talk about this idea of where do we find these spaces. Now, I always talk about during COVID, this is a guilty pleasure of mine because Craig was talking about books, our cozy comfort books. Books where there's if you know who Angela Lansbury is, that's what a cozy comfort book is. And they got me through COVID. Yeah. And what I wanted was more protagonists who look like me, though. So I do have a book coming out that is a cozy comfort book, and the main character's name is Tamika Robinson.
What?
And she's about us and like us and building her own way. But the idea is like for people to understand who we are when it's not all about trauma.
Can I ask you this, Aiko, before as you go on? Could we give away one of your books to someone in the audience today?
Absolutely. Well, you know what? That book is going to be published in April 2022.
Okay.
But what I can make sure that we send is You Are Your Best Thing, which was about shame and vulnerability in the Black community. Nice. And it's an anthology that was edited by Tarana Burke and Brene Brown. And I have an essay in there. It's a New York Times bestseller. So let's give away a few copies of those to some of our folks. The essays are really powerful, and they definitely have had me moved. So I'd love to make sure we give away a couple of those to some of your
beautiful folks. So how do you want to give it away?
So do you get to see who's on here? Do you get to see who's writing?
Yes, I can see everyone who's been
on. So hey, whoever you pick, you can pick a couple of people, and then you let me know who what their addresses are, and we'll make sure that we get them sent to them.
Oh, that sounds good. Okay, guys, I will be going through the live when it's done, and I'll pick a couple people and send off to Aiko. I think I'll go for like the people who participated the most.
Oh, So I know Craig is on there, and I don't know if Lakeisha disappeared. And I wonder if Sherelle is not Sherelle, who I know. Huh?
This is really good. Thank you so much, Aiko, for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I love, talking about this stuff for real. And just, I know I never get people the answers they want because they want me to center other folks, and I'm not going to.
No.
So
I just want you to be you. And that's what we appreciate the most. So thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. This was a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, my pleasure. But thank you, everyone who joined us today for this show. And despite technical difficulties, here we are. We managed to pull off another Magnifying HR Voices. So thank you so much for being here. Let me just share with you guys who we have coming up next week and what the conversation is going to be about. So next week we have
Angela. I love Angela.
Yes.
Awesome.
And our topic is when HR has had enough.
Y'all are going to have a great conversation. Angela's awesome.
She is. I had a conversation with Angela about 2 weeks ago, and what was supposed to be 30 minutes ended up being like an hour and a half. She feels like, that big sister that you always want to talk to. A great conversation. And we're going to talk about Angela's story about when she figured out she'd had enough about the organization that she was working with and decided to make positive changes for herself and left her organization without a plan B. But now doing great things, being a chief people officer in a new organization, but she's absolutely fantastic. So I'm looking forward to having that conversation as well. To all of you who've been here today, thank you so much for joining me. Magnifying HR Voices is live every Wednesday up until the 8th of December. And then I'm taking a break, and something new and something great is going to happen in 2022. I'll let you know.
Cliffhanger.
Cliffhanger. So you have to keep watching until December when I tell you what's going to happen that's new for 2022. But this is Magnifying HR Voices. Thank you for joining me again. Have a great, amazing weekend, week, day, whatever it is. Enjoy it to the full. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you.
You're the winners as well.
Bye-bye.